Welcome to Metro Detroit Birth Stories, where we celebrate the power, wisdom, and beauty of birth one story at a time. I'm your host, Aimee Tuck, a birth and postpartum doula, childbirth educator, and maternal mental and emotional wellness coach. My passion for supporting birthing families began 20 years ago and has only grown since then. In this space, you'll hear real birth stories from Metro Detroit and beyond, along with insights from my work that might resonate with your own journey, because every birth story matters and every journey deserves to be heard. Please note that this podcast is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The stories shared are from the perspective of the person sharing it and do not represent my thoughts, opinions, or views. I am a non-medical professional whose thoughts, opinions, and views are my own, so nothing said should be construed or understood as medical advice. Please discuss all of your concerns or questions with your pregnancy provider. Now let's hear today's story. Today on Metro Detroit Birth Stories, we have Kristi Hodson, who's going to share her births. Kristi, I'm so excited to have you here today. When you reached out to share your birth story, I literally could feel the joy in your words, and I'm so honored to have you share this experience with us, both of your experiences, and to have this opportunity to actually get to talk to you about it. So before we begin, can you give us a brief introduction to who you are?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. I think it is so amazing and powerful to be able to share birth stories, and I jumped at the chance to share it with your listeners. My name is Kristi Hodson. I am a mother of two. I'm 41. I live in Southeast Michigan in the Ann Arbor, Canton area. And by profession, I'm a business owner. I own Artistic Kitchens, which is a small family-owned kitchen and bath design business. So it's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. And you've had two births, and they've been very, very different. So in one word, what would you use to describe your first birth?
Oh, it's so hard. So the word that I use to describe that one is it's almost what I wanted. I had this picture in my mind of this beautiful water birth in a tub. I saw a video during my childbirth class of this beautiful water birth, and like ever since then I was hooked. I wanted that. And I almost got it, but I didn't the first time around.
Wow, what a great word to describe that, and we're going to learn why it almost happened.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and start with that story of your son, Graham, right? Is that
Graham,
okay that we say his name?
Perfect. Yeah, sounds good. It's hard because, there are so many people with traumatic births. I didn't have a traumatic birth, but it wasn't what I wanted. And
Sure.
Knowing what I know now and having experienced birth twice, I wish I could go back and talk to, first time mom me and do things a little differently, With that birth, I had gestational diabetes and I'm advanced maternal age. I'm 41. And they were watching me very, very closely. I chose midwifery care over OB care because I wanted a very natural childbirth. I went to the childbirth class that was offered at Nest and Nurture. And again, in 2021, it was like held outside, 6 feet apart.
Yeah.
But we learned about what natural birth could look like and what support of a doula looks like. I remember our teacher was Cynthia Gabriel. She wrote the book Natural Hospital Birth, and she was fantastic. But she showed us a video in class, and that was the first time I'd ever seen like a real birth, like not a TV birth, right? Like that's the first time I'd ever seen it was in my birth class when I'm pregnant, about to give birth myself. And it was this water birth, and this woman looked so like powerful. And it wasn't anything like you see in the movies where there's like, water break, screaming, like it was just very peaceful. And that's really what I wanted. I was like, I want to give birth in the tub, and I want it to be peaceful and no medications, no interventions, like spontaneous labor. And I didn't get that, spoiler alert. So with the gestational diabetes, watching me closely, I was getting these like NST tests and biophysical profile tests and like tons of visits to U of M hospital. I was working with the midwives at U of M hospital. And, they're like, everything's good. Every time we checked him, everything's good with baby. Everything's good with baby. And then, it got, toward my due date and even beyond my due date. It was 4 days past 40 weeks, which is such an arbitrary number. But they said, okay, like the fluid's getting lower and lower and lower and lower. We're on the cusp of not having enough amniotic fluid. And then with gestational diabetes, my blood sugars had returned to normal. Like I could eat carbs without getting spikes. And they did a consult and said, there's concerns about the placenta. There's a lot of things adding up here, right? My age, the gestational diabetes, and the blood sugar returning to normal. There's the amniotic fluid. Like, we really think that induction is the best choice here. So I was like really sad. I kind of like mourned the idea of just this cool, spontaneous going into labor. And I went home, like my head was spinning, packed my bags, called my partner and my mom. They were my two support people at the hospital. And we went in that evening. And the induction was like a slow process. It just is, right? My cervix was really ready and, very soft. Like, I think I was like only at, a fingertip or something. But we started with the Foley balloon and it got me to whatever it was, like 4 centimeters by the next morning. But labor didn't really start. I didn't have any contractions. Nothing was happening. So we're trying like, nipple stimulation and we're trying walking. And, I walked to Angelo's, the restaurant by U of M Hospital. We like had a little meal there, walked back, like nothing was happening. And by 3 p.m., the midwife that was on staff said, I really think you should consider Pitocin. And that was just like, a swear word in my mind. Like, no, I never wanted this. Like, this isn't what I had pictured. But I was also a scared first-time mom. And so I said yes. And I wasn't fully prepared with like, okay, well, what are the questions that I should ask? Or like, what happens if we wait a little bit longer? But in the moment, you're like, well, I have to keep my baby alive. So I have to say yes to Pitocin. Right. That's one thing I would do differently if I could go back and tell that first-time mom that I was. I would say maybe hold off on the Pitocin a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that because I wasn't sure if you meant that you would advocate differently for yourself or you would flat out decline it. And if anybody who's listened to the previous iteration of this podcast, Doula to Doula, my podcast co-host, Chana, she had them turn the Pitocin off and left the hospital. And so I didn't know if that's what you would have said. Yeah. You'll have to go back and listen to her birth story. It's quite interesting. I'll put the episode number into this podcast where we're through.
That is so wonderful. Yeah. So like I agreed to it, right? Like you're in that moment and you're like, I want to make sure my baby's safe. I've worked so hard. It took us so long to get pregnant. We literally had an IVF consult and had plans to start IVF because we've been trying to get pregnant with no luck and got pregnant that cycle that we right before we started IVF. So this long journey to get there, I can't lose him now. So I have to say yes to Pitocin. That was where I was. So the nurse comes in and, starts an IV line. And I said, well, when will I be able to take this off and, move around? And she said, well, you won't. You'll have this until the baby's born. And I started crying. And I said, I'm going to be hooked up to all these wires and lines. And like, what about this beautiful tub birth that I wanted? And that nurse said to me, everybody comes in here with all these dreams of what they want, and it's just not realistic. You're not going to get what you want. And I just cried. It was like I was so close, and then it just like got like the carpet got ripped out from under me, And she left the room, and I remember telling Dave, my partner, I can't have this nurse. My body's not going to work with her. Like, I don't trust her. Like, this isn't going to work. Can you please advocate for me to get a different nurse? And that wasn't happening. And so I told my mom, like, get me a different nurse. I got to have a different nurse. She doesn't understand what I want. She's not going to work with me. I need a different nurse.
That's great that you said that.
But neither of them did it. So I did it
Oh,
myself. And actually that was the better thing, right? So
yeah.
when the midwife came in the room, I was like, I think I'm having a little bit of trouble with this nurse. I'm worried about my body responding when, it feels like she's not on board with my birth plan that I want. Like, would it be okay if we try somebody else? And I got to advocate for myself. And there's power in being the person that advocates rather than sending someone else to go do the errand, the dirty work, right?
That's
So
so true.
I asked her, and we were able to get a different nurse.
Good for
And
you.
this second nurse that actually ended up being there through the birth, she had been a doula for 10 years in California, and she treated me a little bit differently, and she understood like what I wanted and what I was
Yeah.
trying to achieve, and she was there to support that. And so, I'm hooked up to the Pitocin still. We kept it at a very, very low level. I think the highest level that it got to was like a 6 out of, I don't know, I think it's, what is it, 30 or something? So,
I think it's
um,
20 or 25 is the maximum.
yeah, so 6 is pretty low on that scale.
It is.
And, that was the max. We started out very low, and then contractions got going, and I got into the tub and got to labor in the tub. And like the contractions were pretty powerful. And knowing what I know now of experiencing contractions on Pitocin and without, like,
Yeah.
holy cow, it's like water and Mountain Dew or something. Like, there's it's so much more like powerful, and it's just not enjoyable to have
Yeah.
contractions on Pitocin. I definitely wanted to avoid, an epidural and wanted to have freedom of movement and, low intervention. But I was like, wow, I can see why people ask for it.
Hmm.
And the very best pain relief that I found, obviously the water was amazing.
Yep.
But my partner started telling me stories. He just made up stories on the
Oh,
spot.
I
And
love that.
and it was a skill that we learned in the birth class of like, distracting your brain and giving your
Yep.
brain something to focus on and visualize. And it was something that I had practiced whenever I got a blood draw, and I got a million blood draws with everything and
Right.
involved. But I would like take myself to a really calm place, like to a forest, and I could smell like the pine needles and listen to the breeze. Like I was practicing visualization like all through this pregnancy. And I didn't know he had that skill set in him to like just take me on this cool journey somewhere. So he talked about like a house that we would build, and he talked about vacations that we would take with our baby. And he talked about, our dog and our baby and the relationship that they would develop. And it was just so cool the way that it just got me through really intense contractions on Pitocin. So it got pretty intense, and at one point I heard the midwife say to somebody else in the room, I'm assuming the nurse, well, she's not even in active labor yet because she's still talking. Because every time I would have a contraction, I'd be like, okay, Dave, tell me another story. And I heard her say that because, like, words, like, yeah,
Yep.
I might look like I'm, like not paying attention because my eyes are closed and I'm really focusing, but words are still like feeding into my
Penetrating.
brain. I'm still understanding what's going on.
Hmm.
And I looked at David and said, I can't do this for 12 more hours. Like, I'm not even in active labor yet. And it was so disheartening because what I was feeling in my body was really intense, and it felt like birth could be close. Like this baby's going to come out soon. But hearing that just took
Yep.
me down, and I was like, oh, I can't do this for 12 more hours. Well, now I know. I was in transition when those
Yeah.
words were said. I was in transition.
Oh my
Yeah. So,
goodness.
yeah, I was definitely in active labor, but I didn't know that then because I didn't
Yeah.
know what
You
labor
didn't
felt
know.
like. I
Yeah.
didn't know. And so I said, well, I would like to try nitrous to,
Hmm.
like just to help me keep going and like keep this working. I need a little bit of pain relief. And so then the midwife said, oh, well, I have to go check on the policy. And,
Yeah, because in 2021 they were still not sure about the aerosolization involved with
yeah,
nitrous. Yeah, it was
yes,
very, oh,
yes.
it was a
It was
weird time.
it was a weird time. And so eventually she came back and she's like, well, you can do nitrous, but you can't be in the tub. And so that moment was just like I was shattered because I was like, okay, here I am.
Right.
I'm not even in active labor. Yes, I was. I'm not even in active labor. I don't think I can sit here and do what I'm doing right now for 12 more hours. I don't know why 12 hours stuck in
Right.
my brain, but I was like, oh, well, it's going to be 12 hours before I've given birth to this baby if I'm not in active labor yet.
Right.
So I was like, I just don't think I can do it. And so I had to, like, at that moment, kind of give up this beautiful dream of this peaceful tub birth with no interventions and get out of the tub and get onto the bed and sign consent forms for nitrous.
Yeah.
And
they still had you hooked up to Pitocin at this point?
right around there, it's fuzzy because I was in transition.
Sure.
I think it was right around when it was before I got out of the tub. It was before I got out of the tub. I said, I'd like to turn that Pitocin off. My body is doing this.
Right.
So we turned it off.
Okay.
I mean, I still had the little like port in my arm or whatever, but I wasn't receiving Pitocin actively. And so I got into the bed, signed the consent forms. Why would you ever have somebody like in transition signing consent forms? Like, blows my mind. But I did. And they, brought it. And it was really good relief. And I could just take it as I needed it. Like I could, like focus through a contraction and like, okay, well, let's check you. And I was at a 9 or a 10. Like I'd done the hard work. I just wasn't in the place that I wanted to be. I was on the bed and not in the tub. And so I kind of took a moment and I almost took a nap. I would say I took a nap, except for I wasn't really asleep. I was just kind of like zoned and like focusing and, like getting finally there. And then my body took over and gave me the urge to push. And I pushed out this beautiful baby boy. I gave birth on my side and had quite a bit of tearing. I had a 2nd-degree tear.
Okay.
And so, got stitched up with the help of the nitrous and like this beautiful little boy on my chest. And I remember thinking like, this is the best night of my life.
Yeah.
Because the emotions of it, like, wow, we're finally here. We did this. He's here. He's real. He's healthy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like after, like a few days after, like when you're really in that hormone surge and you start thinking about it, that it just felt really, disappointing because I was almost there. I almost got exactly the birth that I wanted. But I was still very thankful for this healthy baby and for, I didn't go to the top end of the complications and the interventions, but definitely more than I wanted. Sure. So that kind of sets up the story for the birth that I just experienced in November. Mm-hmm. And, through my prenatal care, like this was still my goal. Like I want to have a birth in the tub.
Right.
And like, that's what I want. That's what I wanted the first time. And the complication this time around, I had gestational diabetes again, but it started much earlier. I had like 10 weeks and I wasn't diabetic before. Going in like between pregnancies, blood sugar was perfect.
Yeah.
Get pregnant, my body likes to be diabetic when I'm pregnant. So 10 weeks is when I had to start managing gestational diabetes. And it was also a lot more intense this time around. So
your diabetes was more intense?
The diabetes was. Okay. Yeah. So it was harder to manage.
Sure.
So a meal that I could eat in my first pregnancy would spike me too high in my second pregnancy. I was just more sensitive. And so I knew this early on, and I had been toying with the idea of a home birth because I think home birth is so cool. But, with all the fear that's out there and being like advanced age and gestational diabetes and the other part that I'm sorry I didn't realize I didn't put into the first birth was I lost a lot of blood. I lost about 700 milliliters of blood.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Did
so
they
just
have
under
to,
like a threshold of...
Did they have to do
What's
any
that?
special treatment for you with that? Oh, good.
No, but it was a concerning amount, and it took me a long time to replenish that. I did pass like really big blood clots, like a couple days after. So there was also there was too many elements.
Yeah.
To make my partner feel comfortable with us doing this at home.
Sure.
I still probably would have like gone for that, but we decided on hospital birth because the blood loss, the gestational diabetes, all the factors.
An example of weighing out taking a risk benefit analysis of your unique circumstances. So, that's a beautiful example of doing that.
Yeah. And it's hard. You both have to be on the same page.
Yes, this is true. This is very true.
And he's sitting there thinking like, I saw you lose a lot of blood and I don't
Yeah.
want to be a single dad without you. And I'm sitting there thinking, everything's going to be fine. It's going to be better this time.
Yeah. It happens quite a bit because partners oftentimes, even one as amazing as yours was, they oftentimes don't take in the same information because they're not reading all the books and watching all the videos, and they're limited in the amount that they are exposed to, either by choice or just by circumstance. And so a lot of times when those things happen, they have no clue why it's happening or how severe it is or how much they need to worry. So yeah, it sounds like he had a totally normal reaction.
Yeah. I also think that, when you're pregnant and you're so excited, like you just get amped up, like hearing about birth, right? Like I listened to the audiobook of Ina May Gaskin's Guide to Childbirth, and just all the birth stories in there are just so exciting to hear. And that's part of why I wanted to share mine, because like you need to hear the really good ones.
Yes.
You hear the traumatic ones all the time because that happens to your coworker and your sister and your sister-in-law and your friend and your neighbor. Like those ones happen all the time. Everybody has a traumatic birth story, but like you want to hear the ones that went really well too.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, we decided on, hospital birth, and the challenge of the blood sugar was the care at U of M is you either choose OB care, and that's like a little bit more medical type of birth, or you choose the midwife care, and there's more flexibility, and it's just a different model of care.
Yep.
And I really wanted the midwife model of care. Another difference between the two is you can give birth in the tub with the midwives. You can labor in the tub with the OBs, but you can't give birth in the tub with the OBs. And like with this beautiful vision of this tub birth, I'm like, I've just got to do this.
Yeah.
However, if you need insulin to manage gestational diabetes, it risks you out of midwifery care at U of M.
Yeah.
And so I had 30 weeks that I had to do this with diet and exercise and everything else, like everything I could do to perfectly manage my blood sugar.
Yeah.
Because if I needed insulin, it would be that almost birth, and it would like just rip out like at the last second this birth that I really wanted. So it was hard managing for 30 weeks and 4 days, or 30-ish weeks.
Yeah, mom of a toddler right now. And so I remember when I had a toddler and I was pregnant, it was like just whatever he left behind was what I was snacking on. Like that was my meal. So I can't even imagine having to intentionally make sure that you're eating at the right times, but also the right combination of foods.
Yeah, and add on top of that, I'm a business owner this
Right.
birth. First birth, I was working this corporate job, and you just like, take a break when you need it, and you take vacation and maternity leave, all that. This time I'm a business owner. And then also like I'm still breastfeeding my first child through all this. So he breastfed through the entire pregnancy and tandem fed as well. So needless to say, managing blood sugar was really hard.
Yeah.
But I think that there's also, when you have that big of, when the stakes are that high, like the motivation comes.
Yeah.
And when I picture this as like, if I put this item in my mouth, like that could lead to insulin, which leads to OB, which leads to, whatever, giving birth on my back the way I don't want to or something, So it was a good motivator for me to frame it that way, because that helped me make the choices I needed to make for a very long time.
Yeah.
Throughout that. But anyway, I was able to manage it with the help of, I had a wonderful diabetes educator kind of caseworker that was through the U of M endocrinology department. I also worked with a local dietitian who specializes in women and perinatal, and it was very helpful to have a lot of support for everything that we could do against the diabetes. Anyway, so leading up to the birth, like numbers were good. But then we're, getting toward 40 weeks. Due date came and went. My midwife was amazing and very hands-off. She offered a membrane sweep if I wanted it, so I had 2 membrane sweeps. And she had a really good sense of what the things that really matter or make a difference in your care or matter in the outcomes. And she said that the NSTs, like I could do them if I wanted to. I could go in and get the counts and do all the data, but it didn't lead to any better outcomes than just managing and doing kick counts at home. And I was like, really? Like, why didn't I know this before? Like, why didn't somebody tell me this last time around? I could have avoided lots of, like the stress that comes along with like, oh, is he breathing? Like doing the practice breaths? Like, what is his heart rate? Is he kicking up? What's the fluid level? Like, there's so many data points that, that go into all of that. It puts a lot of stress on the mom.
It does. It really does. Yeah.
It isn't necessarily helpful. So I was so glad that she said that data proves that outcomes are just as good by doing kick counts at home. So that's what I did. She was very hands off. We did a couple of membrane sweeps, and then it got down to the point of, like, all right, it needs to happen this week. Like, do we need to put an induction appointment on the calendar? And I was really, really worried about getting the same midwife that I'd had the first time in the hospital.
Oh,
The one that had said for the first delivery that said she's not even in active labor yet. She's still talking.
Okay.
I was like, I don't think I can have her again.
No. Yeah, absolutely. I totally get that.
Yep. So I'm like, what happens if she happens to be on staff the day that I spontaneously come into labor? But it didn't, spontaneous labor wasn't happening. And we're just kind of like waiting around. And my midwife for my second birth, her name is Sam Sharp. She's phenomenal.
Did you have a conversation with her about what might happen if that other midwife was there?
Well, the conversation, pregnancy hormones and emotions, right? But the conversation went like this. If she's there, I'm going to leave and have a baby in the car. Which is not true. I would not have had a baby in the car, but that's how I felt, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. It got your point through.
Yes. So it came down to like, I really trusted Sam, and I was like, oh, Sam has got to be there for the delivery of this baby. And like, we were looking at the schedule that week, and I'm like weighing, am I going to go into spontaneous labor? I don't know when my body goes into spontaneous labor because I didn't get to do that the first time around.
Right.
And I was, doing all the things like, we're doing like lots of walking. I had been incorporating dates and red raspberry leaf tea and like all the things you're supposed to do, right? And it still wasn't happening. So we looked at the calendar, and Sam was going to be on the schedule from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Wednesday the 20th. And I had my appointment with her the day before on the 19th. And she's like, do you want to wait? Do you want to schedule something? Like, what feels right? They're going to want to schedule you by 41 weeks, which would have been Saturday. And so I'm like sitting there again weighing, do I roll the dice and wait and hope and then get induced by a midwife that I don't know and trust? Or do I, again, schedule an induction and maybe roll the dice and give up the birth that I want like I ended up doing last time and be hooked up? And, like it felt like a lose-lose. Yeah. But at least I'd have somebody in my corner that I'd spent this whole pregnancy with and who I trusted and would be very minimal in interventions. We talked about the way that we would induce, and I said, I don't want Pitocin this time. And she said that she would recommend, breaking my water based on where I was and what she did the cervical check and the membrane sweep. She's like, I think that this is your second baby. If you break your water, I think your body is just going to kick in and do what it knows how to do and have this baby, and you're not going to need any Pitocin. And I'm like, all right. I mean, I trust you. Let's have this baby together, right? So I saw her Tuesday the 19th at 10 a.m. or whatever and settled it. We have an induction appointment for 8 a.m. on the 20th of November. And I went home and I like talked to my mom and my partner about it. And I was like, I really wanted to go into spontaneous labor, but at least I get to have this really cool midwife.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it is what it is. We're going to have a healthy baby. And so we spent that night kind of like getting ready and enjoying our last night as a family of 3. And I remember I took a bath with my son in our big like jetted tub, and we're just like sitting there playing together. I'm like, this is his last night as an only child.
Yeah.
And he nursed in the tub, and it was just like all of the feelings, that remembering his birth, and like
Mm-hmm.
it was the best day of my life, but also then, felt a little bit not what I wanted, and I didn't feel like I was in control, and I didn't feel powerful, and I wish it could have been different. And so it's just like feeling all those feelings. And we went to bed at 10:30. I gotta set the alarm, gotta be up and to the hospital at 8 a.m.
Right.
And 3 hours later, I woke up and I was like, was that a contraction? I was like, it probably wasn't. Like, it was probably just Braxton Hicks, or, you talk yourself out of it.
Right.
And I just like was laying in bed and I was like, yeah, I think that's a contraction. And it just slowly kind of built up, and I'm like, I feel like I need to just get up and do something. So
Yeah.
my little 3-year-old sleeping next to me in bed and my partner's on the other side, I just like got up and went downstairs, and it was kind of a cool time to just be by myself. And I was like bouncing on the birth ball and walking around and putting the last little things in our bag. And somewhere in there, I put in my AirPods and I started listening to like really relaxing music. And showing my age, but man, like Enya, like I love
Oh,
Enya.
yeah. Absolutely.
So I put like Pandora Enya in, and I was like, every time I would, have a contraction, I just like focus on the music and just like
Mhm.
relax through it. And it was like no big deal. I was like, I was like, that, it'll probably be a while, but at least it's like the very beginning of labor, right? And so maybe an hour of that. Yeah, probably an hour of that. And I was like, what? I wonder if I should start timing these. Like, I
Yeah.
guess at some point you start timing. Is this something that we like need to go in for? And so I started timing them, and they were very regular. They were like a minute long. They were about 4 or 5 minutes apart. And I was like, but it doesn't feel that bad yet. Because
Mhm.
in my brain, all that I had experienced was Pitocin contractions.
Right.
And when I experienced these very real contractions, I just was like, get bad at some point, right? Some point we'll go. And so I kept timing them, kept like, I ate like, I need to get some good snacks in me. Like
Yeah.
I had cashews, and I don't remember what else I ate, but I was like protein focused and like, got to get ready for this marathon that we're doing together.
Right.
And at some point I realized like they're like, 3 minutes apart. I think I better wake Dave up. And it was 3 a.m. And so I'd been like an hour and a half of contractions that went from like, is that a contraction, to like, I'm definitely timing these and like focusing on the music, and yeah, I think we better go. And I woke him up and I said, we gotta go to the hospital. He's like, why? Because he's thinking, our appointment's at 8, like it's 3.
Right.
I was like, because I'm in labor. And so he got up and we started getting ready. The plan, you have a plan. The plan was that my mom would take my 3-year-old to my
Mhm.
aunt's house, and then we'd all converge at the hospital at 8 and have this birth together. But what really happened was at 3, Dave and I left for the hospital, and she let him sleep, thinking, okay, and when he wakes up, we'll drop him off, and then I'll go to the hospital and be there for the birth. So we got to the hospital at 4. Driving in, I live in Canton on the very west
Okay.
side. So driving down Getty's Road, which has lots of trees and fields, like I think we saw 20 deer on the way
Oh
to the
gosh.
hospital.
And that's a for people who are listening who are not in Michigan, that can be a hazardous drive.
Yes, yes. So if you hit a deer, you're stopped and you're
Yes.
like your car is wrecked. It's, this giant animal that, does a lot of damage and they can just jump out.
Yep.
So you might be
Yeah, they're
driving,
not looking both ways.
they're not looking both ways. And it's something you don't really have to worry about in the daytime, but in the
Right.
dusk and in the night hours and in the early morning, they can jump out and you got to stop really fast or you're going
Yep.
to just hit this deer. So we're driving in and see like 20 different deer along this route. And this road is bumpy. Also in Michigan, we have a lot of potholes and bumps. I'm like, Dave, don't hit any bumps. And he's like, we're in Michigan. You're I'm
It's
sorry.
unavoidable.
But what I'm looking back at, I was like, wow, labor was really progressing.
Yeah.
And by the time that we got to the hospital and went to triage, they checked me and I was a 5. So they're like, yeah, you're having this baby today. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, we're good to stay. And so I told them that, the birth that I wanted and that I really wanted to be in the tub. Is there a tub room available? Because you don't always know if there's one available. So they got one ready for me while I was in triage. And I don't know how long the walk is from triage to that room, but it felt like 2 miles because every contraction I had to just stop and listen to my music and focus. And it was just a minute long. That's all. Just focus. And then boop, I'd be like, okay, I'll talk again and we can walk and make our way there and contraction and I'd stop and focus. So I'm doing this all the way to the tub room.
Mm-hmm.
And they filled the tub and then just kind of left us on our own, which is really nice. And I'm thinking, oh, it's probably a few hours before I need to get in the tub because these contractions aren't that bad. It's not what I experienced last time. I know what a contraction right before birth feels like, right?
Mm-hmm.
The contraction. And so we got set up with some lavender. They put a fan with lavender essential oil and aromatherapy and got the music on the speaker. So I was
Your Enya?
listening to Enya and Yanni and just really beautiful, calming music that I love.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's going to be a while, but I might as well get in the tub because it looks so good. That water looks really nice. And I got in. I was like, yeah, these are just focusing just a minute at a time. It wasn't like the Pitocin contractions that were just on top. It was like this rolling, permanent contraction, with barely any break.
Mm-hmm.
And this non-Pitocin contraction was just like, okay, I just need to focus for a minute and then I can talk. Obviously they get more intense and I was like, Dave, you might need to tell me some stories. But the nurse and the midwife just kind of left us alone. We were in there and I was like, I feel like I need to poop. I'm like, Dave, what am I going to do? And am I going to poop in this tub? Am I going to have this baby on the toilet? What's going to happen? And so I got out and I was like, I'm going to try to poop and then get back in the tub. And I sat down on the toilet. I was like, nope, this baby's going to come. I got to get back in that tub right now. So I got back in and nobody's there. Dave is there, but there's no midwife. There's no nurse.
He didn't call the nurse's button or anything?
I think you need to call the nurse. So neither of us in this state thought about there being the call button in the bathroom with the tub.
Yeah.
He went out to the room to try to find the phone and call somebody. And meanwhile, I'm like, oh my goodness, this baby's going to come. And now I'm really by myself. I'm like, help, help, help. There's a little bit of panic. What, why isn't anybody here? Right. And I'm like, saying, help, help. And I opened my eyes and there were about 10 people in the room. Because if you hear somebody yelling help, and I think he also hit the call button, they're like, oh, we got it. What? You don't know what
What's
you're happening. And I opened my eyes and said, not that much help. There's 5 alarms. So there were so many people in the room. Okay. So it was just my nurse and my midwife again. And they just kind of stayed on opposite sides of the room and said really encouraging things to me. Mm-hmm. And it's so amazing, the power of words from my first birth to the second birth and the different outcomes that those had. Mm-hmm. So by telling me, they didn't tell me directly, but by saying it to somebody else and me overhearing, she's not even in active labor yet, she's still talking. And the effect that had on that birth versus the second birth where the midwife said, you're safe. Mm-hmm. You're doing a great job. It was just encouraging things.
Yeah.
And the nurse would say, just relax, and you can sway your hips. but neither of them had any hands-on, and it like they didn't, it wasn't like birth was being done to me, like I was
Right.
doing it. It was
Yeah.
a huge shift. And like the contractions at the very end are a lot more powerful, but they were
Hmm.
nothing compared to the Pitocin contractions.
Yeah.
And so like I felt my body start pushing. And it was interesting. I had listened to a birth podcast like in the week before about like positioning and all of that. And your body will just kind of figure out what position it wants to be in. And at
Yep.
certain stages of labor, it wants to be standing. And that's when I was at home. I would just like kind of lean against my countertop. And when I was walking down the hall to my room, I would just lean against the wall. But when I was in that tub, I was like, no, I need to be squatting. It was just like
Uh-huh.
your body knows what position to be in.
Yep.
And I could feel my body pushing. And like I reached down, and I'll never forget what it felt like to feel my baby's head finally coming out. Like it was so cool. And I remember like
Oh.
thinking, wow, it kind of feels like jelly, but like that's my baby's head. Like this is what I didn't get that with my first. I didn't ever really get to like feel and be part of the process in my
Yeah. Okay.
first. It was just like laying down on my side and somebody else is kind of
Right.
watching and taking over. But in the tub, I'm like reaching down. I'm like, oh, I feel good. And even now, every single time I'm like holding my baby in it, like if I happen to put my hand on like on her bald little head, it takes me back to that
Yeah.
moment in time and like feeling it for the first time. It was so cool. And it was, I don't know, like maybe 2 or 3 pushes, I don't know. You just kind of like go into that labor land space, and
Yeah.
she was out, and I caught her myself in the tub. Everybody, it was Dave and the nurse and the midwife were watching, but they were hands off.
Yeah.
And I caught this baby, and I looked at her, and I just thought, we did this.
Yeah.
Like, her and me and nobody else. It was just the two of us together.
Oh.
And like the power that I felt in that moment, I have never
Mhm.
felt more empowered in my life. And I, as a woman that has done a lot of really cool and important and powerful things, like the most powerful thing was delivering and catching that baby and like
Mhm.
looking at her and realizing that we didn't need the intervention of anybody else. Like it was there if we needed it, but like we actually got to do it together ourselves. And she looked at me like it was just I just didn't want to get out of the tub. And
Yeah.
eventually they're like, she's gonna get cold. You need to get out. They said it way nicer than that. But like it just being in that moment, I wasn't just experiencing that birth, but I
Mhm.
was experiencing like healing from the
Mhm.
first birth and like
Yeah.
the decisions that got taken away from me and the things that were said that
Mhm.
like made me just feel really down. Like all that kind of just got cleaned up and healed, and like I just didn't realize that birth could be so healing when
Yeah.
it's empowering that way. So I'm so thankful that we had such a different experience the second time around, and physically it was so much easier on me for recovery.
Mm.
And you think of like, oh, it's just one day, like, yeah, if you have Pitocin, it's just rough that day. But the type of birth that you have when you experience those interventions, I had the second root tearing, and I had
Mhm.
a lot of pelvic floor physical therapy to do, and
Mhm.
recovery took, months.
Yeah.
And with the second birth, like there was no blood in the tub. Like when they checked me, they said there's no skid marks, there's not even a scratch or not, there's nothing. Like she
Yeah.
just, when you do it yourself, and like if your baby's kind of optimally positioned, thank you to Dr. Rubina at the Joint for Webster Chiropractic. Like she just
Uh-huh.
helped me out that way. Perfectly positioned, slid out easily. Like the
Mhm.
recovery is way different,
Yeah.
like when you keep all the blood that you're supposed to and don't lose like 700 milliliters,
Mhm.
it's a lot easier to bounce back with your energy. And
Yeah.
I think that there's like a lot of anxiety and depression and like difficult things that you experience when you go through a birth that has a little bit too much intervention. So having all of that removed the second time around, like I was like, I wish I could give birth 1,000,000 times if it was just like this. I'm 41, that's not happening, but I just love how empowering it felt.
Yeah.
It was a goal that I'd had for literally years, ever since I
Hmm.
saw that video in Cynthia's class.
Yeah.
And we did it and we accomplished it. And, it's a moment I will never forget.
What a beautiful story. Oh my goodness. I have so many things running in my mind right now.
Share, do share.
First off, so I have another podcast episode that Shauna and I did called Partners Are the MVPs of the Birth Room.
Oh, yes.
And it sounds like your partner, Dave, totally fit that bill. And
Yes.
the reason why we say that, because even as a doula with all of the education and experience and, having attended over 100 births, over 135 now for me, we still are not the ones who know the birthing person best. I would never think to make up stories to tell. I have done visualization with a client before, but I would never think to make this long, beautiful story. And the connections, the emotional connection, and that's the thing is birth partners have usually such a strong emotional connection. And you mentioned, Pitocin, that's the other thing that's flying through my mind. Recent research, I want to say that it was Dr. Sarah Wickham that I read. I'll have to find the information and drop it in the show notes. But basically, and if it's not her, it's some other great mind in the birthing world. Basically, what this research showed is that the oxytocin receptors on your uterus don't really differentiate between synthetic Pitocin and oxytocin. Pitocin is just a synthetic version of what your body already creates. The biggest difference comes in the blood-brain barrier, that the Pitocin molecules are too big to pass through the blood-brain barrier. And so that means that your brain perceives those contractions differently because it's not responding by kicking out more pain relieving hormones.
Wow. Yeah. I experienced that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking when you were telling me that. I was just like, yeah, your body was doing everything. It just your oxytocin receptors were dragging more Pitocin molecules than they were oxytocin molecules, it sounds like, and that was just not enough of your own, pain relieving hormones. But then also one of my biggest things, and I made this switch quite a while ago in my approach of support, and we've talked about it in the past on the previous iteration of this podcast. I'm going to keep referring to it because it was such a big, it was 4 years of my life that we were co-hosting together. But we talk a lot about trauma-informed care, and that's something that is kind of like almost a buzzword right now. But what you said about hearing something, and this is the thing, and I've seen this so many times, where either the person giving birth or their partner will overhear something that the nurse or the provider says. And it may not even have anything to do with that person. It might have to do with the patient in a different room, but automatically you start filling in the gaps and you start wondering, is this about me? And they don't realize how much you hear. And like you said, you looked like you were inwardly focused, but that stuff still penetrates and has a huge impact. And that's what the research shows, is that the difference between people who have or report traumatic birth experiences as opposed to those who report positive experiences, it's not entirely about the interventions. A main component of that is the interpersonal relationships they have with their providers. And so that midwife really let you down by saying that within earshot of you. Whether she really believed that or not, she could have said it in another place and protected your space.
Yes. Yes. Because that was the pivotal moment that changed the outcome of my birth, was like saying something that then made me doubt that I could do it.
Right.
And then I just kind of like surrendered to the interventions instead of surrendering to this birth that was occurring, So,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not even always the provider. Sometimes it's the family members that are in the room. Like maybe they're talking amongst themselves. Maybe they're saying things that the birthing person is now hearing and taking on
yeah.
themselves. So it just you said something about language. I really remember my head is swimming with so much because you had so many incredible things. But language matters. Language matters, and the way that we frame things and the way that we say things around a pregnant person throughout their pregnancy, but especially in that extra inherently vulnerable time of the birth space.
Mm-hmm.
Words that we feel might be innocuous can be profoundly impactful for the person giving birth. And like you said, it translates into their postpartum recovery and then their family.
Right. And conversely, just something as simple as saying you're safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could feel myself relax when I heard those words. And like that just might be just something that comes out of her mouth and it's no big deal and it's just an everyday thing because she's delivering babies every day. But like that, the impact of really helpful words is strong too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I feel like both of your stories, when we first started, initially, and I love the organic feel of these conversations because initially we were going to just focus on your daughter's birth.
Yeah.
But you can't, like you said, your your daughter's birth was inherently linked to her older sibling's birth, her older brother's birth, because you were impacted on such a deep level. And this is the other thing. Textbook wise, if we just were to look at your son's birth from an objective point of view, it was a textbook, totally perfect, probably ideal induction.
Yep, it was.
But from your perspective, it was healthy mom, healthy baby, but not a positive experience. Or not
Right.
as positive as it could have been.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And I hate feeling like I'm complaining about that birth because I see it in the context of there are so many worse. But like it still matters and it still, does have an element of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not at the scale that some people experience, right? But when I've experienced both of those, like I can truly appreciate the second
Mm-hmm.
after having the first experience because it was so wildly different.
Yeah. And it just, there's a couple of things even in just what you said. First off, many, so we only give birth, a small number of times in our lives. On average, we are only giving birth like maybe 3 times in our lives. Most people do not have more than 3 kids. And if they do, they certainly do not go for a half dozen or even a dozen. So it's a finite number of experiences that we have giving birth. And so each one is important and each one does matter and each one does imprint on us. If you were to talk to your mom, an older person, older than your mom, I bet they could share their birth story with you because it just gets in our core. It changes us as women.
Mm-hmm.
We are also birthed in that moment. And so what happens in that experience also impacts us. And what was the other thing you had just, I almost want to like hit the rewind button. Have you say it again? You have such amazing sayings.
I don't know what it was. It's gone. I'm 4 months postpartum. Like my brain is Swiss cheese. Sorry. I don't remember
No
what
worries. I'm 26 years postpartum and my brain is still Swiss cheese.
it was.
But yeah, you're oh, I know what it was. Yeah, and it we have a really bad habit, I think, of just societally wise, kind of comparing, even
Guilty.
grief. I read recently an article, or it was a short article where somebody was grieving the loss of their sibling, and their boss at work came up to them and said, your attitude really sucks lately. And this person explained what had happened. It had only been a few months. And the boss said, well, I lost my grandparents around the same time. And this person was kind of like, well, I'm sorry that you lost your grandparents, but I feel like a sibling loss is just a little bit different. He's like, oh, so are you comparing griefs now? My grief doesn't mean as much. We have a bad habit of doing that in our society, right? Of trying to like compare and one up and all of that. And when it comes to birth, especially first birth, what I really try to get everybody to understand is we make the best decisions that we can with the information we have at the time. And sometimes pregnancy throws us curveballs that come completely out of left field. You had a completely healthy lifestyle. You never had a blood sugar problem a day in your life. And then all of a sudden pregnancy brings it on. And it changes the trajectory of how things go. And so you're almost playing catch up. Like now I have to learn all of this and how it's going to change things and what are the benefits and risks of all of these other things that might happen. And it's a lot.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot to learn anyways when you're pregnant. Like it, down to like what can I eat and not eat and what should be happening now. But the added layer of any complications health-wise, like gestational diabetes, or I know that some people deal with like blood pressure. Thankfully, my blood pressure was always perfect, but that just adds another element of a big learning curve in a very short amount of time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. One question I had when you were talking about reaching down and touching your daughter's head and it felt like jelly, was her bag intact or had her water broke sometime before that?
So they had asked me, did you ever feel like a ping, like your water broke? And I'd never felt that. So I think the bag was intact and it burst like when her head was coming out. Yeah.
That's
cool.
amazing. Yeah, that is so. And the fact that you were the first person to touch her also, what an absolutely spectacular memory for both of you to have.
Yeah, there's nothing like it. I wish I could have caught Graham as well, my son as well. But like catching your own baby is like a very intimate, powerful, like unforgettable moment.
Yeah. Amazing. All right, so I'm gonna throw a question at you.
Yeah, okay.
Somebody that you care about, or it doesn't even have to be someone you care about, someone you remotely know a little bit, comes to you and says, tell me the top 3 things I need to know before I have my baby.
Cool. Top 3 things. I think you need to know people that you can rely on. And I'm going to say that's like pregnancy, birth, postpartum. And we just don't have the villages that we used to. And, if you're going in planning on a natural birth and you're planning on breastfeeding and you don't have, a mom that experienced those, that can share those, I thankfully did. But if you don't have that, that becomes a barrier because you're trying to figure it out at the mercy of whatever provider you're dealing with. And I think that postpartum, it's easy to just get out of the hospital and go home and then you kind of like left to figure it out. My mom stayed with us for a couple of weeks both times. And the first time around, I remember she would, gently reposition my baby so that he wasn't like craning his neck trying to breastfeed. She was a lovely league leader for years. And so she was like, it was like built-in breastfeeding support for the first couple weeks of my motherhood, which was amazing. So seek out those people. If it's not somebody that's related to you, it's somebody in your community, whether that's a doula. We have a postpartum doula this time around that we didn't do the first time. Or whether that's like lactation consultants or the Leche League, like just figure out the people and they'll help you figure out the solutions to the problems. That'd be one big thing. Number 2 would be just to really trust in your body and your intuition. And yes, there's all this studies, there's all these data points, there's all this information overload that you can take in, but not one of those studies are about you and your body. And, I feel like in this country especially, we teach women not to trust themselves and not to trust their bodies and to almost treat their bodies like an enemy rather than like we're on the same team here, and trusting that you can do it and following through, and the power that you feel after that is really, really important. And number 3 is to have a clear goal in mind. You know, unlike what that first nurse said to me, like, everybody has these birth plans and dreams and it just doesn't work out. I don't believe that. Like, it can. And sometimes having that goal in mind and like get an idea, like listen to some really great birth stories and watch really great birth videos and like get it in your mind that this is what I want, and it makes the hard parts a lot easier. So, you know, this picture in my brain of this tub birth got me through 30 weeks of counting every single carb and planning out every single meal with a 3-year-old at home. You know, and I think that it can get you through a contraction, having that end goal in mind, or whatever hardship you have to face. Like, if that's the end goal, you know, the first weeks of breastfeeding that are hard, you have this goal in mind, like that kind of helps make the harder parts happen still. Or makes the harder parts easier, I guess.
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. And the other thing that I also want to really commend you on with your statement about goals is that you were flexible. You understood that even though we have plans, sometimes we need to make adjustments. And I always try and tell my clients, we can control a lot of things, right? We can control the environment to a certain degree, make it all warm and cozy in there, potentially. We can control, you know, our partner's presence, whether they're there or not. You know, we can even control the power of the contractions with things like Pitocin. The one single thing we cannot control is the passenger.
It's true.
And sometimes the passenger goes along so we can achieve our goal without a problem. And sometimes the passenger's like, nope, I love you, Mom, but that's just not happening.
I think my little passengers that were so cooperative, both of them.
Yeah.
That's very true. Yeah. Just because you want something or you have it in mind, you're exactly right. Birth does throw you, you know, a curveball that you can't always control. That little sweet passenger.
Yeah, so just having a little bit of room for some flexibility, which it sounds like you did. Even when it came to your second birth, your plan was to get induced. So when she decided to go into labor a few hours ahead of time, you were like, okay, because you could have just dug your heels in and said, it's not happening. I'm ignoring everything, and I'm just going to wait till my 8:00 appointment.
I was so thankful that that didn't happen. It was just like, it was such a blessing that things got moving and I didn't have to go down the road of induction again. The one sad little part, and I guess I didn't share like the timeline here, but one little sad little part that I would have changed is she came so quickly that my midwife that was on at 7 a.m. missed the birth by about 20 minutes.
Oh.
So the one that I'd like
seen, that was your chosen one.
The prenatal care. The reason that I was like, okay, I'm going to get induced with Sam. She was on at 7 a.m. and my baby was born at like 6:21. And my mom also didn't make it to the hospital because my little boy was sleeping. And she was like, oh, we've got plenty of time. We'll make it to the hospital. And so she didn't get to be there for the birth. I wish those two could have been there, but like I arrived at the hospital at 4 a.m. and had a baby in my arms at 6:21.
Wow. That is truly a remarkable story. And so you're 4 months postpartum, you said?
Yes. Yep.
How are things going?
Way better than I expected. And again, I think it's, you see wherever you are postpartum through the lens, it's hard not to compare, but through the lens of what you experienced the first time. And, you know, the first time the physical recovery was really hard. I was on maternity leave from a corporate job, but I was like, you know, it was a full-time job doing all these appointments, right? And doing the physical therapy exercises. And, you know, it's just a long recovery. And then on top of that, the mental recovery. So like I experienced a lot of postpartum anxiety the first time around. And I joined a wonderful support group with Rise Wellness Collaborative. It was a free support group for new moms, and we just, like shared our experiences and gave support. I don't know how I would have made it through the anxiety without that group, but I remember different points where, carrying my baby from our room to the nursery in the night to feed or change diapers or whatever, and like walking across the balcony or like upstairs, walking by the balcony and just like holding this newborn thinking he's just gonna fling himself over the edge. Like,
Yeah.
you like just have all these intrusive thoughts
Hmm.
and I lived a lot of my life with fear, like that anxiety of
Yeah.
postpartum, and this time around it's not there at all. And I
Okay.
don't know if that's because of being a second time mom and like it feels different. I don't
Hmm.
know if that's a different birth that I went through and I didn't have, as traumatic of an experience as I did the first time around. Or, just maybe my brain chemistry is different, the support is different. I don't know what
Hmm.
it is, but I don't have it. And
Yeah.
that has made it so that I can get back to just like enjoying my life as a mom of two, jumping into, again, being a business owner. I design kitchens and bathrooms, and at 3 weeks postpartum, I went out on a cabinet delivery where we were like, delivering cabinets. And I brought my three week old with me. She was in a little baby carrier. And it was just like, it just felt like she like slid into our lives and we just kept going on rather than this like monumental first birth where you're just kind of like time stands still and you're
Hmm.
trying to recover and there's so much going on mentally. And it was just so much smoother this time
Yeah.
around. So we're doing really well 4 months postpartum. She's getting her second tooth at 4 months.
Oh wow.
Had her first one at 3.5.
She is early, isn't she, on everything?
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But so of course, like we're going through teething right now and sleep changes at 4 months.
Hmm.
And something we're doing differently this time around is co-sleeping from day one rather than waiting
Yeah.
for 2 months like we did the first time around. And I feel like
Hmm.
that's been a huge positive impact on my mental health as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Sleep is probably one of the main components of mental health
yeah,
wellness is making
yeah.
sure that you have that good anchored sleep of, you know, 3 to 4 hours uninterrupted where you're
Mhm.
able to like go through your sleep cycles. That has a huge impact on your ability to handle the mental and emotional load of the day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I didn't know before was, some babies aren't going to sleep for 4 hours in a bassinet. They just don't. They're not
Yeah.
wired that way. That's not their biology to want to be away from mom.
Hmm.
And so I followed all the rules that you're supposed to and put him in the bassinet by himself on his back. And he'd sleep for like maybe 20 minutes. And I
Mm.
was getting these just teeny tiny little blinks of a sleep. And I remember one night thinking, I could hold 2 hours at a time. Like, this is amazing. So the first couple of months were a big struggle the first time around because he just didn't sleep without me. I read a couple of books. I read Safe Infant Sleep by Dr. James McKenna, and I
Hmm.
read Sweet Sleep by Leleche League. They're both wonderful, and they helped me understand like the data and the research, and they helped me understand like my instincts. And I learned how to like safely prepare my bed and like
Hmm.
safely co-sleep with my baby and breastfeed all night
Hmm.
long. And you can actually breastfeed a baby like 3 or 4 times in a night and have a really good night of sleep. If
Yeah.
for some
Yeah.
reason, if you're not getting out of bed and,
Hmm.
walking to the nursery and avoiding the balcony and you're
Right.
just there in bed together, I doing that from day one has probably made a really big impact for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are some cultures, mine included being Asian, where it is abnormal to put your baby in a different room to sleep. It
Right.
just is not what is culturally, it's not the cultural tradition, it's not the core of our beliefs. So I think the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, is recognizing that even westernized families who are breastfeeding do end up, just it happens, you bring that baby into the bed with you. So it's really good that you did your research ahead of time. It's commendable. And I'm going, you've dropped so many resources. The one that I didn't get a name for was your pelvic floor therapy. Who was that with?
Oh, the pelvic floor therapy, I did probability. Sorry, words are
That's
like,
okay.
what was it? Probability, Trinity Health. I went to the one in Ypsilanti the first time around and the one in Canton the second time around. They're all fantastic.
Okay. I just
But
want to be able to drop those links into
yeah,
the show notes, all of the little nuggets of information. You have so many nuggets that I hope our listeners will pull from whatever resonates with them, because you really brought a lot to the table today, and I'm so grateful for that. It's truly been an honor to hear both of your birth stories.
thank
What
you.
amazing ways your babies came into. I just I think in pictures, and I just picture, I don't know what Dave looks like, but I just picture this, in a nice darkened bathroom, this man shape telling you stories as you're laboring in the tub. It's just, yeah,
It
what
was
an
really
amazing,
beautiful. And
yeah.
I forgot to share this as well. The second time around, he is an amateur photographer and like has a nice camera and loves to take like artistic photos when we're out hiking or of our kids or whatever. And since my mom wasn't going to be there when we're on the way to the hospital, I'm like, Dave, you got to take some pictures of this because
Yeah.
like my mom's not going to be there. And he pulled through so many ways. I'll share one or two that you're welcome to share with this podcast. But having him there with the stories, the support, the photos, like I look back and those are like my favorite photos of myself of my whole life. So
I
it's
love
really
that.
really special to have that support. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And so I'm so grateful too that you accepted my to be on video as well. So we're going to take this podcast, the video component, we're going to add it to the playlist on my YouTube page. And that way our listeners will be able, because I want to be able to provide some more information behind like the gestational diabetes and Pitocin and all of those kinds of things. So we'll have some visual aids for people to kind of understand those things better. And if you wanted to send me a picture from your birth, I can
Thank you.
always add that on here so anybody who's watching the video will be able to see it. This has just been such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me and with all of the listeners. I hope it's been inspiring to me, and I'm not having any more children. So,
Thank you for giving me the space to share it. I mean, I think that birth is really powerful, but like it's even more empowering when you get to share it and have people listen and hold space for you, and I appreciate that.
yeah, absolutely. So, if anyone listening wants to connect with you, what is the best way that they can do that, either personally or professionally? What could you share with us?
Oh yeah. So I guess the easiest way to find me is on Instagram. My business is Artistic Kitchens. It's artistic, ARTISTIC dot kitchens with an S.com. And feel free to DM me there. I have a personal one as well, but it's like more locked down, so it's easier to find my business.
Perfect.
But
I'll make
and
sure that
there's
that's
a
in the show.
newborn picture of Lane on my business if you go back far enough in my Instagram.
Oh, fabulous. Yes, we'll definitely have to check that out. All right. Well, the great thing about this, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now.
Yeah.
Thank you for spending time with me today on Metro Detroit Birth Stories. If you loved this episode, let me know. Leave a review, share it with a friend, and come connect with me on Instagram at Metro Detroit Birth Support. And if you have a birth story to share, I would love to hear it. Please take a moment to reach out to me, whether it was 6 months ago or 60 years ago. Your story could be the inspiration for someone who hears it to gain the confidence they need as they embark on their own birth journey. My email is in the show notes. This podcast is produced and funded by me, and I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, take care. Be gentle with yourself. Be kind to others. And remember, every birth story deserves to be told. The music you hear on Metro Detroit Birth Stories has been provided by Purple Planet Music, written and performed by Chris Martin and Jeff Harvey.